please do just use the raise hand facility if you've got a question to ask, or pop it in the chat, and we'll pick those up as we go through as well. I know obviously as a webinar, you might not want your camera on, but we'd really appreciate it if you did. Just so that we know that you're present and listening and fully engaged within the webinar as well. We are recording it, so hopefully that's okay with everybody. We pop them on our YouTube channel so that you can access them at later date as well. So I'm going to hand over now to Gavin and Ryan from Talon. They'll do some introductions. This should last about an hour, something like that. But as I say, plenty of questions, and they're here to really impart their knowledge and help you understand it as well. So I'll hand over to Gavin and Ryan.
Great, thank you, Catherine, and welcome everybody to the webinar. We'll do some more detailed introductions in a second. What I'll just do first of all is sort out our presentation on screen so that that's in place and we can get moving from there. And I'll share it as a slideshow. Because I'm sharing it as a slideshow, I may have limited access to seeing things like hands up and any comments that are made in the chat as questions. So I'm relying a little on my colleague Matt Rudd, who's on the call, to just jump in and highlight that, and also Ryan will be able to spot those as well. But just to echo Catherine's points, please do ask questions as we go through. We kind of aim for this sort of presented material to last about 45 minutes, and then sort of there's 15 minutes for questions, but we can mix it up a little bit and have that presentation spread over an hour and then have questions as we go, kind of however you guys want to interact with the presentation. But we'll kind of have some stop off points to make sure that people have got an opportunity to ask questions. As you've probably already seen as well, the webinar today is being recorded visually and from an audio perspective, and Catherine mentioned that it's going on the YouTube channel as well. So a couple of opportunities, I suppose, for you to be able to go back to the material, and also the slides will be shared afterwards as well. So that's just a bit of introductory information, I suppose, to get us started. So I think the first port of call, if I can actually move my slides along, sorry. First port of call before we introduce ourselves then is why are we here? So just covering what this webinar is really going to be about. So we're doing kind of a coverage of smart energy and flexibility policy, but we're going to take a bit of kind of like a drill down into some things that might be of relevance to building controls in particular, and maybe some areas of ambiguity and concern that you might have around, particularly around some of the aspects of load license controlling, smart secure electric systems, etc. So we're going to start off with a kind of an umbrella view of UK policy and regulatory landscape for smart energy and flexibility. Then we're going to take a step, well, my colleague Ryan will take a step into SSCS, and then a deeper step again into the proposed load control license, and then we'll look at that applicability to sort of building controls and building owners, and explore some potential grey areas and areas that might be kind of like of interest or concern to BCIA members. So as not to drain the point, 4 key steps. We'll start off on smart policy and flexibility, then to SSCS, then to load control licenses, then to applicability, and then kind of like come back at the end to the top, I suppose. So who are we, very quickly? So I'm Gavin Beresford. I am a smart and decentralised energy expert and lead within Talon. So I lead a small but perfectly formed team of smart and decentralised energy experts, and we kind of have a very much a matrix approach within Talon. So I sort of benefit from having access to a very wide range of expertise, which of course your BCO members have as well through your association with Talon. And I've got just over 20 years of experience now in the energy sector, starting out in energy supply world, in sort of major program delivery and major solution implementation, and then moving into kind of like the world of smart metering. And I've been doing smart metering, especially from a consultancy perspective, for about 10 years now, and so have kind of like a good solid grounding in smart energy, and then what that kind of enables from that. I'll hand over to Ryan quickly just to introduce himself.
Yep. Good afternoon, all. Ryan Dale, working very closely with Gavin in the smart and decentralized energy space, looking at all aspects of flexibility. And so what we're talking about today is very much within our kind of wheelhouse. Similar to Gavin, I've been around in the industry now for about 25 years, covering the entire kind of meter to bank process within energy. Probably slightly more comfortable in the electricity world than the gas world, but yeah, fully experienced across both those areas. So yeah, looking forward to talking through subjects with you today.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. I won't dwell too much on what Talon is and who we are. I think most of you are probably engaged with us through sort of BCIA membership and the support that we give. But just as in a nutshell, I suppose we're a consultancy that, from our perspective, we're working out of the UK, but Talon is a global organisation. So we have consulting skill sets and technology skill sets and operational skill sets posted across the world, and we're roughly about I think we're about 7,000 employees. But the people that you're engaging with now, so like the likes of Matt, we've got Dave on the call as well, myself and Ryan, we're much more kind of like anchored to the policy regulation and and strictly, I suppose, from mine and Ryan's perspective, that smart energy perspective and low carbon technologies. Great. Okay, so we'll get into the meat of things now. So let's have a quick kind of like overview, I suppose, of smart energy and flexibility policy. So I think it won't be news to anybody on this call that smart energy and flexibility is pretty much now central to how sort of GB energy market and the the infrastructure around the GB energy systems, it needs to transition to sort of like low carbon. So smart energy and flexibility is a core part of that. So kind of like the importance of data and systems and a flexible approach to the grid and a flexible approach to endpoints on that grid. So like domestic premises, businesses, buildings, etc. is an important part of the future of our system. That's from kind of like an affordability perspective. It's from kind of like an energy security perspective, and it's also from a ability to move to more like renewable forms of energy production as well, and allowing those to be integrated strongly into our future grid. So it stands to reason that government policy and government regulation is kind of increasingly more so focusing on smart energy and flexibility, and that being kind of underpinned by digital technologies and the work that then goes forth after that in terms of developing the market processes, the market signals that enable smart energy and flexibility to sort of thrive within the energy system. So this is kind of like, I suppose, underpinned by sort of three core objectives. I mean, this is relatively simplistic, I suppose, but I'm just sort of going from the top. So obviously we've got net zero by 2050 as as kind of like the key objective. So we've got sort of a sub objective in that, I suppose, of being of having a decarbonised power grid by 2035, but net zero as a nation by 2050. We've got a pillar of enabling energy security through smart energy and flexibility. So this is very, very prevalent. I mean, everybody knows about what's going on in the world right now and what's been going on in the last few years with kind of like geopolitical situations, and energy security is therefore like right at the top of the list of reasons why we need to have a smarter and a more flexible energy grid, which is reliant upon generation which we can manage ourselves within GB. And then the third pillar is kind of like the affordability and the efficiency for I suppose updating and maintaining our national grid as it goes forward. And a big part of that is what flexibility can play in helping to, for want of a better word, maybe soften the blow of some of the cost of reinforcing our grid for future energy demand, and some of the electrification demands that are going to be coming onto us over the next kind of like 30 to 50 years. So across smart energy and flexibility, there are some kind of enablers that are going to help us achieve these three areas. So I won't drill into these in too much detail, but happy to sort of go into them with questions. But we've got smart systems and flexibility. So kind of like critical in terms of like the actual IT systematic side of things. How do we actually systemize the grid to be able to enable smart energy and flexibility initiatives? We've got the actual market itself, how it needs to be reformed, and that's kind of what's being sort of born out of REMA as well, and other initiatives to look at how the energy market needs to evolve. And we've obviously heard even more news on this yesterday when Ed Miliband spoke about kind of the decoupling of gas and electricity, and it's all sort of part of the same thing of driving towards a more resilient energy system. We've got the evolution of networks and the system operation of those networks at kind of like national grid level and at that DNO level as well, about how the grid is protected for the future. There's retail and consumer protections as well. We're seeing a lot of new technologies come into the mix, and a lot of data that comes forth from smart energy or smart metering, sorry, which brings out all sorts of sort of dynamic abilities to create new tariffs and introduce new opportunities for consumers. But what that has to come with that is those protections for consumers as well. That comes with kind of like data security. And then, of course, one of the critical ones is aligning across the nation buildings, heat and electrification of all of those things. I suppose we probably should have included transport in there as well. So that's the kind of like the environment we're working within here. And it's constantly evolving. So we're not kind of in a sort of position where things have been discussed and resolved at a policy level and a regulatory level, and now it's kind of like go forth and everything's set. There's lots of things continuously evolving. So we are moving from kind of a world where over the last 5 to 10 years, there's been lots of discussion about how the market needs to evolve, and that's starting to happen now in the form of delivery. So we're going to be seeing lots of initiatives and programs starting to cease to become initiatives, and programs start to be BAU activities that see flexibility in particular, but also other aspects of smart energy being kind of like synonymous with the way that we operate the grid. We're going to be seeing more system integration, and that's going to become sort of critical later on in this presentation from a discussion about building controls as well. In all sectors, not just the energy sector, we're going to continue to see greater and greater emphasis on digitalization and data and data security, and how that data can be driven to enhance and make our energy grid more efficient. And then we're going to see also the evolution of what REMA brings. So kind of like the outcomes of that kind of are aiming to deliver kind of like those stronger market signals, more efficient pricing, greater indications to investors of investing in the GB energy system, and those wider benefits to consumers, and I suppose the simplification of our energy market. I think I'm just going to finish up here then before we'll drill down into the next level with Ryan then, of kind of like what we kind of expect from the future. So we've kind of got short term here of sort of, again, moving out of that space of initiatives and projects and moving into kind of like scaling and readiness for the market to become really strongly engaged in smart energy and flexibility. And we see this through various things that are going on in the market at the moment, MHHS being one of them. We've got kind of like the growth of the role of the DSO, of moving out of DNO, so distribution network operators, to system operators. We've got NESO's role growing, especially in their role in enabling flexibility as well. And then in the medium term, so after kind of like the sort of next 3 years, I suppose, next 2 years, moving into kind of like the next decade, I suppose, we're going to start seeing quite a lot more reform to our energy market, and really significant integration of all of our energy sort of systems that have been quite sort of disparate, I suppose, in the past, coming together under a number of initiatives, data initiatives, single source of the truth, and those outcomes of REMA. And I think in the much longer term, talking the next sort of 20 to 25 years, I think we're going to be seeing the whole sort of system optimized. Really, we're going to see the mass electrification of our system. We're going to be seeing that across heating, across transport. And also we're going to be seeing the introduction, I think, quite strongly of flexibility across all aspects of generations. So not just from a domestic point of view, which is often kind of like focused on from a press point of view, but also in sort of commercial buildings, apartment blocks, and in industrial sites where there's going to be big opportunities to not only use flexibility to help balance the grid, but also for there to be commercial opportunities from being involved in flexibility as well. So that was a very sort of quick, high-level spin through of where we are kind of in smart energy and flexibility policy and how it's really sort of driving forward. But I think probably what's going to be more important now is we drill down into some of the things that might matter more specifically to sort of building controls and building owners. So I'm going to hand over now, I think, to Ryan on the next slide. He's going to take us down into SSCS, and then it's something that's actually specifically going to be quite important to discuss, which is load control licenses. So Ryan, over to you.
Thank you, Gavin. Okay, hello again. Just to check in, I did mention in the chat, if there was any questions, feel free to leave any in there. Before I jump into was there any questions for Gavin around energy policy at all? If not, I will get in with SSCS and take you through that. So I'll start, I guess, firstly with what SSCS actually is. That's a bit of a tongue twister for a start. So it's a smart, secure electricity systems initiative set up to move the UK towards smarter, more flexible, cyber secure electricity system. It's built around consumer-led flexibility and energy smart appliances, so EV chargers, heat pumps, batteries, all of that great stuff. And it's very clearly pointing at the assets that sit behind the meter and can charge, so it can change and affect demand or export through digital signals. There are 3 key design principles that run through the whole program: cyber secure systems, interoperability, and consumer protection. The principles act as guardrails for how digital load control is meant to operate at scale. So if control signals are going to influence load across a large number of devices, security and resilience become system issues. Interoperability is an issue because the ecosystem is fragmented and needs to work across various different vendors and platforms. And consumer protection matters because consumer protection matters, and this is happening in homes and buildings. So consent, transparency are key factors in this policy. The system architecture essentially shows the chain end to end. So you have energy smart devices sitting at the edge, the HEMS or building management systems as the layer that manages them within homes and buildings, and then connects that to the market and the grid services. That's the route by which flexibility moves from individual devices into something that can participate in wider system operation. I apologise, obviously, if this is all old information for you, but I think it's just worth clarifying that, and so that we're all clear on where exactly we are. So the motivations for government here are threefold. The programme is trying to unlock flexibility to reduce peak demand and system costs through domestic scale flexibility. The three design principles of cyber resilience are also tied in, and is also tied directly to Clean Power 2030 and net zero, with sort of scale up of 2.5 gigawatts to 12 gigawatts by 2030. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the definition of the load control license as it's set out in the consultation. This is a proposed new regulatory requirement that governs entities that control the flow of electricity into or out of energy smart appliances, including within buildings, through digital signals. The consultation, as you will be aware, could be aware, on LCL closed on the 18th of February 2026. So we've set the direction of travel, and the focus now is around implementation. So the key aspect here is who's covered by the license, and that would be organisations who are making load control decisions, flexibility service providers, and ancillary devices used for automated load adjustments. That range, I think, is important because it shows not only about how the end device, it's about the end device, it also reaches into service delivery models and the supporting kind of control stack that sits around that. The implementation timeline shows that applications are opening at the end of 2026. There's a 12-month transition through 2027, and the license being a requirement by the end of 2027. So it's timely to start thinking and preparing towards this now. So for anyone who's in building products, and I assume BCIA members are likely to be in that space, or providing services around flexibility, that's effectively the time frame for getting your governance, assurance, and operating models in shape. And hopefully the next few slides can give you some steer onto how you can do that. I think the key regulatory elements to note are, as I mentioned on the previous slide, cybersecurity aspects, consumer protection and data privacy, and operational resilience obligations that will exist within the license. We're then talking about the kind of enforcement of that and how that will work, and undertaking regulated load control activities without a license becomes an offence. So it's fairly robust language, and that is the kind of reason why it's important that organisations that you're a part of understand where you sit within the scope of that. Any questions at that point? Worth just feel free to raise a hand.
I think Ryan, one thing, maybe to put it simply as well, we have for a long time had in the market the energy supply license, which energy suppliers have to have in order to operate as energy suppliers. It's what they have to go through as the application process with Ofgem, and then beyond that they have to adhere to a compliance regime for being an energy supplier, which ranges across a whole load of requirements. So in its simplest terms, this is an equivalent to an energy supplier's license to operate from the perspective of an organisation that wants to operate, I suppose, renewable energy assets, whether that's through kind of like building controls or directly with an asset like a heat pump, etc. And it's bringing those organisations into scope of having a license akin to an energy supplier. Obviously, they're not directly comparable, and energy suppliers have a lot more scope, but that's the sort of intent we're looking at here.
Thank you. In fact, if you move on to the next slide, there's a bit more around the kind of principle of the load control license. So firstly, it's important to know that it's activity-based, not necessarily asset or owner-based. So building controls, HEMS, BMS can fall within the scope, but only when they're used to provide remote third-party control in response to external signals such as price, flexibility, dispatch, and system needs. So that's the kind of the core principle around which this license is built. And there's a kind of simple core test as to the two licensable activities to consider. So load controllers, which are defined here as entities that create, modify, or send signals to control energy load, or flexibility service providers, defined here as entities that contract with consumers for flexibility. So that like kind of core ruling splits technical control from commercial contracting, and in many real world models, if you like, those responsibilities don't necessarily sit in the same party. So when you apply that logic to building controls or HEMS, there are kind of three scenarios to consider. So if controls are used for user-only optimization behind the meter with no third-party control, that's not licensable. If controls are used in response to market signals, in response to flexibility requests and engaging the market, then that's likely to be licensable. If controls are instructed by an aggregator flexibility services provider, then yes, that's quite clearly a licensable activity. And then thinking about it from building owners, hosting, owning, or internally operating building controls is not itself a trigger. Building owners are generally considered out of scope. However, it's worth noting that they may need a license if they themselves operate as a flexibility services provider or an aggregator. So appreciate there is some there are some issues around clarity, which we're hoping to assist to get to the bottom of, because I think there's the defining lines there can be somewhat blurry. So the coverage in SSES on this subject is currently recognised as ambiguous, which is greatly helpful for building controls in particular. So what's missing from SSES? So building controls, HEMS and BMS are not explicitly named through although other ESAs are. Hybrid service models are not recognised within SSES, and owner-operated portfolio control responding dynamically and algorithmically to price signals is also not recognised. So there is still clearly work to do to provide that additional clarity. Okay, next slide, Gavin, if I could please.
I suppose worth maybe just pausing for any queries or questions at this stage as well.
Sure.
Okay, I'll jump us on.
Okay. So the ambiguity does require some clarification, and I think there are some ways that we would advise BCIA members to consider, and they can act in parallel. And I think the first would be external engagement with DESNZ and Ofgem. The other is more about internal preparation for BCIA members while the guidance is still developing. So on the DESNZ and Ofgem side, DESNZ retains policy ownership of scope and exemptions, so the engagement objective there is to test and shape the policy intent for building controls and its scope boundaries. It also points to targeted engagement with the SSES programme using evidence-based policy briefing. Now, that briefing should cover the risks from a lack of clarity on how building controls fit the flexibility operating model in the GB energy market distortion that could occur if building controls are treated inconsistently, and missed social, economic, and grid efficiency opportunities if building controls remained ambiguous within flexibility. For Ofgem, it's a case of requesting that statutory guidance. Ofgem intends to publish license guidance and examples before applications open at the end of 2026. And joint industry questions can be submitted to the email address on the slide, flexibility@ofgem.gov.uk. But I think also there's additional work that BCIA members could consider themselves in terms of preparedness for this. So I think there's some proportionate and preparatory action that BCIA members could take, and that starts and is largely based around reviewing operating models and assessing your current and planned activities against emerging flexibility and other potentially licensable activities that fit within the LCL scope. Identifying where regulatory change could affect products or services that you provide, and reviewing relationships with aggregators or other delivery partners, and have confidence that any aggregator responsible for dispatch or load control holds or will hold and is making plans to adhere to the appropriate load control license requirements. I think the role of building control providers needs further definition, and ensuring that building control vendors operate as control service providers rather than asset controllers to avoid any direct control over flexibility dispatch or market-facing decisions. And I think lastly there to maintain a clear separation between owning or hosting assets and applying grid responsive dispatch or optimization. So I guess the question there, and I'd welcome any input from anyone on the call, is the license scope clear enough, and what are your thoughts on that? Feel free also to you're welcome to contact us offline as well if you wanted to have a kind of a chat through any of the things we're talking about today. I think it's important that the understanding is clear, and if you're concerned about any aspect of it, we'd be happy to discuss that with you. Let's move on to where we're at now next, and what to look for and what to monitor in the future. So the timeline for load control licensing in terms of what's happening now, as I've mentioned, the consultation is closed in February. Ongoing work on license conditions, consumer protection, and interoperability and cyber standards are being finalised as we speak. So I think the message here is that the policy phase is over, and it's all about the detailed rule setting, and that's the kind of work in progress at the moment. In terms of what's happening next, we have upcoming milestones. Ofgem and BEIS will finalise the licence framework and guidance, and licence applications are expected to open towards the end of 2026, followed by that transition period, as I mentioned, in 2027. And so in terms of what to look for, what to monitor, the definitions of what a load controller is, and the reporting requirements of anyone who fits into that category. Cyber and operational resilience expectations for cloud and APIs will be key to see how those aspects of the policy develop. Alignment with other ESA regulations and related codes, because that is part of sort of the coordination piece across various different policies that are going to be coming together over the next few years, and that's kind of basically a checklist of where the scope and compliance burden will land in practice. Thinking about kind of some of the key monitoring areas to look for. So as I mentioned, license framework, meaning how the finalization of conditions and how the application process will work for licenses. Consumer protection, specifically new requirements for the opt-in and opt-out mechanism will be key to understand. And then more broadly, kind of data governance and any reporting requirements to Ofgem, and market participation, meaning people who participate in flexibility market opportunities. And I think that's particularly worth calling out because it frames licensing as both a compliance requirement and an enabler for participating in flexibility markets under clearer rules. So yeah, that was kind of the deep dive we wanted to take you through today around load control licensing, and I think over the next few slides, Gavin's going to take you through some of the risks and opportunities that exist within this space. So yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So, like Ryan said, moving on to kind of just a bit more of general coverage, I suppose, bringing us back out of the detail of load license control. And I think what we've heard there is that, you know, if you're an organisation that's introducing building control assets into you know, whether it's an apartment block or commercial premises or industrial premises, so you may not necessarily be in scope for needing to have a license, but that doesn't mean that you might not want to have a role in participating in flexibility. You might want to offer up those assets either as the asset provider, or if you're kind of like the building owner or the premises owner, you might want to use assets that you've procured to participate in flexibility, and you might want to hand that kind of responsibility and ownership of instructing and controlling those assets onto another third party, like a flexibility service provider or aggregator. You might want to do that yourselves and become that kind of flexibility service provider or even aggregator if you're kind of like managing multiple sites. And so again, that kind of adds to that kind of sort of ambiguity as to where you position yourself. But that said, whatever position you're in, there's an opportunity to participate in flexibility, either as controlling those assets or giving up those assets to be controlled. So flexibility, like everyone's talking about it, huge opportunities in participating in flexibility, but there's also some risks or challenges that should be considered as well. So I think the first clear opportunity with flexibility, and it has been so for a number of years now, is that kind of is that new revenue stream, that differentiator revenue stream that kind of it exists beyond the kind of like the normal participation in grid. And appreciate that there is, you know, there has been initiatives and models in the past where you know, local sort of production of energy, or you know, things like FITs and things like that have allowed that kind of like two-way interaction with the grid. But this is kind of like a much more significant step forward in terms of offering up assets to be kind of like turned on, turned off, turned down, turned up, etc., in order to respond to market signals, sometimes at sort of like microsecond sort of periods of time. So real kind of like revenue stream opportunities for sort of working your assets hard, not just to provide the sort of environments they provide in the sort of premises that they're in, but also to work as flexible assets on the grid. This then sort of trickles down, I suppose, into customer value. So that might be, I don't know, let's take an example of an apartment block. Say you know, residents within that apartment block might be able to benefit from the flexibility that is offered up by kind of like building controls within that building being used to manage flexibility, whether it be sort of sub assets or whether it be kind of like what people are doing within those sort of domestic premises. So you can drive out kind of like a sort of further benefit for people that might be your customers as well. Clearly, it's a market differentiator as well. That kind of ties back to like the new revenue stream. There's sort of, I suppose, lots of opportunity to present as kind of like something that's working towards net zero and something that's working towards being more energy efficient and being more commercially efficient as well. And I suppose that also ties into the sustainability impact of participating within flexibility and kind of that role that we've kind of all got to play in supporting those clean power and net zero targets. But there are risks and challenges with being sort of involved in flexibility, depending on what your position is within that sort of chain of roles. I suppose most notably, if you're kind of the flexibility service provider or the aggregator, then clearly there's going to be a regulatory burden, and that regulatory burden is set to increase with the load control license coming forth. And so that's something that any organisation thinking of applying for that license, or maybe already operating as an aggregator or flexibility service provider, having to move into, is that increase in that regulatory burden. I think that one of the challenges specifically in this area for building controls, building owners, building controllers as well, is determining whether they do fall into that scope of being a load controller. We've been through some of the ambiguity of that. Hopefully we've managed to kind of give some clarity on that, but there is still a little bit of ambiguity as to whether you as organisations will be subject to that load control license, depending on your activities that you're performing. Clearly, we're talking about data here as well, and access to systems and access to assets, and so cybersecurity is absolutely top of the list in terms of protecting consumers and protecting assets from being used for malicious reasons or even affecting the wider grid. And I suppose the last thing is that that whilst there's new revenue streams here, whilst there's opportunity for market differentiation, obviously any step into the flexibility space should be well considered, and consider sort of the business models that you want to work with, consider the business case behind becoming involved in flexibility, the sort of the outlay for assets and the payback period for employing those assets and then participating in flexibility. It's not kind of like an overnight return. There's lots of considerations that there should be in that. So some opportunities, risks, and challenges in participating in flexibility. I think we're now really just looking at the time. I think we're sort of coming to about where we thought we would be. So I'll just sort of wrap up with our sort of like summary and next steps, I suppose, and then see where we are with any questions before we close. But so I think what we've seen today then is that there's quite a clear smart policy and flexibility policy direction. I suppose potentially even you could arguably say moving out of policy and moving into a delivery, and flexibility specifically is very much intent to be embedded as business as usual across the system, whether you're domestic premises, or whether you're commercial or industrial or apartment blocks or renewable energy sites, etc. Flexibility is absolutely going to be critical. We're seeing SSCS sort of starting to come to a head, and it delivering the changes that are needed within the market from kind of a system point of view, from a consumer protections point of view, from a licensing point of view, and we can sort of start to rely upon kind of like a common approach out of SSCS. And then finally drill down again into that load control license space, which is kind of like the niggly bit that's unclear at the moment for building controls and building owners, is that we do see a lot of clarity in that, in terms of it being activity based and not kind of like owning the assets themselves. So hopefully that brings some comfort, but there are some gaps in load control license that it may be helpful for those of you working in building controls or building ownership or building controllers to investigate further. So in terms of our next steps, we'll there's lots of information on these slides which we probably didn't cover. There's lots of words, so we will certainly share the slides with BCIA members through Catherine. There'll be a YouTube video of this presentation which you can refer back to as well. We probably propose as a next step that BCI members consider that ambiguity around the load control license, and whether they see a need to maybe further engage with Ofgem or DESNZ to try and gain some clarity in those areas.
Just got a question from Graham.
Oh,
Gavin.
hi, Graham.
Sorry, I wasn't meaning to interrupt your flow. Yeah, thanks for the session. It's a helpful overview. I could come back to that ambiguity point. I think that is a real challenge on this framework. So I'm working in SSC and in the regulation team at SSC supporting our smart buildings functions. And one uncertainty we have is how it applies to building controls who might not be engaging in flexibility markets. So it is a license only required if you're doing remote building control and engaging in flexibility markets, or if you're just doing it for other reasons but not actually engaging in flexibility markets with that sort of building control. My impression is it's regardless of your intent of why you're controlling business, the capability is what brings you into scope of this licensing regime or the scope of this. It's not just the intent on how you use it, because the cybersecurity risk lies in you having the capability, and that's why they want the license. But I think there's sort of somewhat uncertain. It's not directly explained. So I think there's something we've been going back to DSNS on and off Ofgem to push for clarity here. But I think there's a real value for pushing for clarity on that and asking DSNS and Ofgem to provide some specific guidance on how they see this licensing regime or this regulatory framework applying to building control systems and the different types of activities they may be doing. That's something we're doing individually, but it might be something to consider more for others as well. Because I do appreciate there's other questions within the design of it on how this applies to EV charge point operators who operate cloud computing systems. So that the control systems are going through their cloud computer systems, and so far DSNS has a tailored workshop for them to try and get under the bottom how this regime could apply for them, but they've not yet done a tailored workshop for how building controllers could are affected. So I think, if there's any work that can be done just to push for that sort of tailored discussion on building controllers, I think that would be helpful.
And I think, Graham, I would absolutely agree. There's almost like a contradiction in the network, so DNOs and National Grid and ESO kind of arguing, and I suppose there's activities going on as well, projects going on to identify where there's assets on the grid that could potentially change the load on the grid, versus what we've spoken about here, which is a load control license, which is seen as activity based, so responding to kind of like market signals, as opposed to kind of like asset ownership based. But the two things don't necessarily easily reconcile, because, like you say, you could not be participating in market activities, but you could still be doing things with assets that change load on the grid, and probably quite significantly as well if you're talking at kind of commercial industrial scale. So I think it is certainly something that needs to be explored further with Ofgem and particularly DSNS. Okay, thanks, Graham. Well, I suppose in light of what Graham's saying there, the third thing I was going to say here is we'd be keen to talk to BCI members, and I'm sure BCI members will want to talk with each other as well about some of these challenges, and especially ones that Graham's mentioned there. So it'd be good to help and participate in that. I suppose that really kind of brings us to a conclusion of where we were going today. Appreciate there might be lots of questions, and you might not want to ask them now, and you might want to kind of like ask them afterwards. And so certainly offer up, obviously, through if you go through sort of like the BCIA structure, I'm sure those questions will make their way to us. And happy to take any last questions, I suppose, before we sort of hand back to Catherine. I'll hand back over to you, Catherine.
Brilliant. Okie dokie, that's wonderful. Thank you ever so much for the presentation and the explanation. As has been mentioned, if you've got any questions that arise after this, do feel free to contact me or the guys at Talon directly. We're happy to share their details. Thank you for joining. We will send the link when the recording is uploaded to YouTube, so you can access that at your leisure. That's everything for today. Thank you.